that I enumerated will go a long way into bridging the gap when it comes to deficit. The deficit that we are budgeting on, Honorable Speaker, the next financial year is around 718 billion. But Honorable Speaker, in the year of consideration of these supplementary estimates, we are talking about a deficit which was on the books of 860 billion and another 200 billion that had been spent at a 223. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, we are talking about a deficit of financial year 22-23 of 1.1 trillion Kenya shillings. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, when I see, for example, news, Honorable Speaker, about monies have been monies that have been borrowed, and especially by the current Treasury, Honorable Speaker, I want to give in some more facts, so that even as we report on the basis of actuals.
Chairman, you're doing very well, but your time is almost up. So just to.
Honorable Speaker, this country was to borrow 1.1 trillion Kenya shillings in this current financial year. And therefore, when you hear that the Treasury has borrowed, for example, the borrowing that happened last week, these are not monies that are being borrowed by this regime. These are monies that are being borrowed because they were part of the budget that we are implementing. And therefore, we are just fulfilling the revenue side of the budget that we actually got in place when we assumed the positions that we currently occupy. Honorable Speaker, generally speaking, we are just mopping up areas that cannot be able to absorb monies by 30th of June and directing those small monies, which are marginal, to areas that could be able to absorb. Honorable Speaker, I want to thank every member of this House. We always gain from your interactions as the budget. We always gain from your interactions, and even in this kind of debate, we actually come to listen and learn. Having said that, Honorable Speaker, I want to request the chairman of all transformers in Kenya, of the energy sector, the petroleum sector, Honorable Engineer Vincent Musyoka Kawaya, to second this motion.
The Honorable Kawaya.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Budget. Those were quite some credentials, and I appreciate. Mr. Speaker, I raised to support this supplementary too. And I want to second. And I want to start by thanking the Budget Committee. I think it has done a great job, especially to accommodate most of us as the chairs who had their budgets for the respective ministries affected by supplementary too, and spending your time to late hours. Mr. Speaker, I think most of the times we are really very realistic with our budget projections. And that's why by the end of every financial year, we have to come back on the table and see how to rationalize our budgets. In most of the occasions, you'll find that the projections are overestimated, while on the other end, the A&As that we are projecting from our sagas are actually underestimated. And this is an issue we need to confront, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to set an example. When we looked at the current estimates, barely weeks down the line, when we looked at the printed estimates that were presented to Treasury and the financial statements of our MDAs, you will find that only 2 weeks down the line, they've already changed their estimates for A&A. Meaning that in most of the occasions, there is an intention to understate the A&A that is projected to be collected. And that's why you see in most of the supplementary two budgets, there is a spending spree by most of the MDAs. And in some of the items that are also very interesting, we'll see most of them wanting to spend these A&As in buying furniture, in buying vehicles, going for workshops, because this money was actually put there specifically, just wait for the late hours or the end of the financial year to be able to spend that money. Mr. Speaker, again, also we've also been facing a huge challenge, especially in the sector of the energy, where absorption becomes a challenge, not necessarily on the exchequer part, but the processes that lead to absorption of also the foreign funding, which, for instance, accounts in the energy sector for almost 80% of our budget. Then the rigorous procedures and processes delay absorption of our resources. Mr. Speaker, even as we discuss this supplementary budget too, then we can never discuss this in isolation. We also need to have a discussion as a country, which is an honest discussion around budget financing, because for every budget that we have in this house, there has to be a source of resources. And it is very, very interesting when you see our conversations, especially when we are discussing the finance bill. You rarely find any honorable member who is not interested in a discussion that takes project to their respective constituencies, transformers to their respective constituencies. But when it comes to the discussion on how to raise those resources, then we all want sometimes to play to the gallery without undue regard and to how we are really supposed to raise these resources to finance these budgets. It is only fair for us as a country or as leaders to tell the country that there is a reason for the actions that we are taking. We have, I think, failed in telling Kenyans the why and dwelled on the what, especially on the revenue-raising measures, especially the finance bill. We must tell Kenyans that Kenya Kwanza inherited a shell in the name of an economy because our predecessors decided to loot this country, decided to carry money in sacks. They decided to literally borrow everything they could so that we are left with a huge, huge burden that somehow we can't run away from. And you know, facts are very stubborn, Mr. Speaker. Our revenues that we've been collecting are barely 2.1 trillion as our collections. And when you look at our collections at 2.1 trillion, you look at our debt repayment at 1.4 trillion. It tells you that if you collect 2.1 trillion and pay your debt at 1.1 trillion, you only have 700 billion, out of which our recurrent expenditure is 600 billion, or at least has been 600 billion. That leaves us with 100 billion. With 100 billion, the county governments are waiting for 376 billion from that 100 billion. It therefore means that even if you give them the 100 billion, you have to borrow some 270-something billion to give the counties. And therefore, as we do this discussion about revenue-raising measures, I ask members, especially from the other side of the political divide, let us kindly not play to the gallery. The easier way not to raise or to expand our tax base in the country would have been summoning and looking for the one, Uhuru Kenyatta and his brother, who put us in this mess, and they would probably tell us where these monies went to. And we can plug that deficit without targeting Kenyans to raise, because we have a responsibility as a country. There is no gain without pain. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, as we move towards the current estimates, I think there is also something to learn from the current supplementary budget that we should work closely towards having budgets that are manageable, making realistic estimates in our budgets. Mr. Speaker, the current budget that we have, I think is basically a more responsive budget, and without even leaving important items out. And I think it does take a bit of wisdom and creativity to come up with a responsive budget. And I want to support that statement. In the energy sector, for instance, we've been having a budget of, say, 90 billion. And I'll tell you in the past, the current budget, which is a reduced budget of 65 billion, for instance, seems to be more responsive in terms of how this particular budget, for instance, gets us as Kenyans a better solution in terms of lower cost of power than the previous budgets we had in the past. Where, Mr. Speaker, we have an attempt in this particular budget. I am.
You need to answer it.
No, the Honorable Kawai will be heard. The Honorable Kawai will be heard.
Protect me, Mr. Speaker. I know where the problem is, the looting part, but please bear with me. The problems that we are facing as a country originated from some two brothers. Mr. Speaker, something also to note around this supplementary budget. The Article 223. You know, in the past, this article has been purely misused by most of our government departments. And for issues that most of our maybe MDAs or ministries feel that probably will not easily pass through this parliament as an oversight authority, then they will spend this money through Article 223 and wait for parliament to be able to pass that expenditure through the supplementary budget. And we had an expenditure of, which is right now flagged and the subject of an audit from one of our lines, the Loyangalani Suswa line, which I want to commend this particular government because we've seen reduced appetite for expenditure through Article 223. You can't get much benefit from this Article 223 because rarely is it used in good faith. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, we must resist from attempt by some treasury officials to make budget for this particular parliament. We've seen occasions where supplementary recommendations by the budget committee are overturned in the last minute, or there's an attempt to overturn those recommendations by treasury. I think it is important for this House to stamp authority. We have seen even attempts to reduce allocations to projects affecting members, and even the proposed expenditures for these particular resources would be termed as low priorities. So I urge members to be, especially
He already seconded when he started. Yeah, but you can give him the mic just for the sake of Honorable Mbadi. Give him the mic for a second so that he seconds.
Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I second. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Sioka. Honorable members, before I do the needful order, Honorable members, before I do the needful, I will wish to recognize the presence of the public gallery this morning of Ongata Royal Academy from Kajiado North constituency in Kajiado, and students from Ndurarua High School from Dagoretti North in Nairobi County. We welcome them to follow the proceedings of the National Assembly this morning and wish them the best in their tour of the city this afternoon. Honorable members, it's now my time to propose the question, and before I do so, I'll just remind you that the motion was moved in an amended form under Standing Order 48, and the amendment affects the schedules, not the motion as moved, and so as you debate, you are accordingly advised. Honorable members, I now therefore propose the question that this House adopts the report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee on the second supplementary estimates for the financial year 2022-2023, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, 20th June 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 223 of the Constitution and Standing Order 243, approves an increment of total current expenditure for financial year 2022-23 by Kenya shillings 9,515,817,997 in respect of the votes as contained in the schedule. And 2, approves a decrease of the total capital expenditure for financial year 2022-2023 by Kenya shillings 34,977,926,251 in respect of the votes as contained in the schedule. And 3, approves an overall decrease in the total budget of financial year 2023 by Kenya shillings 25,462,108,254 in respect of the votes as contained in the schedule. And 4, resolve that the schedule forms the basis of the introduction of the Supplemental Appropriations number 2, Bill number 2 of 2023. Of course. So this chance will go to members. I'll follow this, unless I'm assuming that those who have, put in the, I mean, this house since we started, there are those who put intervention because they want to talk about that thing in the morning about the protests. So that's why I said I will follow the list as I have it here. They will always do. So if you want to contribute, you tell us, then you proceed. And the first chance goes to the Honorable Gigi Kagombe of Gatundu South if he's in the House. Then that chance then goes to the Honorable Wilberforce Oundo of Funyula.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute supplementary estimates 2 for the financial year 2022-2023. And I must laud the Budget and Appropriation Committee Chair for having taken us to some basic or elementary lecture on economic and macroeconomics. Honorable Speaker, ideally, and I've always stated this and I'll not tire to state the same, supplementary budget is an epitome of laziness in economic planning. Pure and no other question. Article 223 was never in any way meant to cover inefficiencies of the planning department, inefficiencies of the executive. It was generally meant to cover those cases of emergencies and unforeseen circumstances, typical like what happened during the COVID-19 of 2020 and 2021. It baffles everybody, anybody who has attended any economic class, that the government cannot be able at any given time to precisely project the revenue they are likely to get.